Good afternoon, Frank.
Good afternoon, Professor Sporer.
It's interesting to have a weekly opportunity to talk again. I've been thinking about all the things that have been going on over the last couple of years, which we keep on talking about in one way or another. And it seems to me that not only are there a lot of new things that are very different from what have happened before, but that it's a change in quality. It's a qualitative change. It's not just that they're new events, but they're the sorts of things that wouldn't have happened before. And I think that gradually, as more and more new types of things happen, we're gradually going to have to get used to the idea that the quality of, I don't want to say the quality of human life, because I want to draw attention to what I think is the real thing that's changing. And I think that that is the way we form relationships and the way we interact with each other. And I think this is the result, and this has come up, I think, before to some extent in what we've said in previous weeks, but we haven't actually concentrated on it before, and I think it's becoming, it's getting to the point now where it needs much more careful attention. The fact that none of the categories of different types of people are in fact valid anymore, and we all have many more different types of relationships which are no longer identifiable categories of relationships. It's just something that comes with the need to interact and deal with much larger numbers of people than we ever had to deal with before. And that's changed the way everybody deals with everybody else, and that's changed the way elections work. It's changed the way the quality of what happens on the street. It changes. I mean, terrorism is part of it, which never happened before. I think that, I mean, one of the things that social scientists and historians have never actually dealt with, and anthropologists are very much at fault, because they've made their name, got their place in the curriculum over the last century simply by dealing with culture, which was very important because it helped us replace the idea of race for explaining human diversity. But we should be looking at just exactly the way sociality works, the way people interact with each other, and that's we've never done. And it's very difficult because we don't have any methods for it.
Well, I completely agree with you. I think to a very large extent what's happened is that people are incapable of recognizing the distinctions between the qualities, the different qualities of different relationships. And the relationship that you might have with a sibling that you've known for your whole life, that you can say anything to and admit your prejudices to and admit your inner feelings to, things like that. People now, because they're unable to perceive those distinctions, feel that they have license to be able to act that way with far more broad groups. And with the increase in communication tools, as well as the example, whether it be from Donald Trump or whether it be from Hollywood or whether it be from all of these YouTube personalities, the same example is just promulgated out that it's all right to say anything to anyone, and you no longer have to be concerned. If you feel it, it's all right to say it. And you're right. This is why things are happening now that never happened before, because those boundaries don't exist any longer.
Well, so much of the way life was organized until the middle of the 20th century had to do with religion. I mean, everything we thought about the ideal family comes out of Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
And then gradually people stop going to church, and then gradually they stop getting married.
Right.
And the family became something you could make up yourself in any way you wanted. And not that everybody does that yet, but nevertheless, it's gradually become accepted as perfectly okay for people to form households in any way they like. And gradually this sort of thing is happening in other parts of the world. It's even happening in Iran, which is an Islamic republic, and is where women have to wear uniforms when they go out in public, but nevertheless they're not bothering to get married anymore. It's beginning to happen in China. So the whole quality of human life everywhere is gradually changing, but we're going through a transitional period at the moment, which is, and that means that some people are ready for it, some people aren't ready for it, and that's when it can cause problems, because we're in that situation again where we have unevenness. Some people are ready for it, some people aren't. Some people will rebel against it, and resist it, and some people won't.
Do you think the human species will evolve so that individuals are going to become immune to criticism or castigation from far-flung corners of the world, and it's just going to be part of the de rigueur everyday life kind of thing? I mean, that kind of interaction?
Well, I certainly think that evolution hasn't stopped. But of course, anything that has to do with biological evolution is a very slow process. But one of the things that we've, and I think this may have come up in previous discussions as well, but it's worth bringing it up again now here. One of the things that the studies of evolution have neglected is that most species, in one way or another, collaborate in order to be able to compete better with other species. And what's been happening in human history is that human beings have gradually been getting together in larger and larger numbers to begin with. I mean, the Paleolithic lasted for 200,000 years, pretty much. Mm-hmm. And very little change happened because it was very difficult for human beings to get together in larger numbers than scores or 50s or something like that. So there were very small number of minds working together. And over the last 10,000 years, and it's only 10,000 years, we've been living together in larger and larger numbers, which means that more and more minds have been in interaction with each other, and the process of collective learning has been accelerating. So it's for that reason that we've achieved far more in the last, we've had much more innovation and adoption of new technologies in the last 20 years than ever before. And simply because of we've always focused on individuals and believed in individualism as a political objective. But in fact, in order to understand what's going on, we need to understand ourselves as a social species. Mm-hmm. And the fact that the larger the number of people in a social group, the more it can do.
Well, I don't necessarily dispute the potential of increased collective learning and increased achievement, but I certainly think that we're seeing the underside of that as well now. Because as these social norms disintegrate right in front of our eyes, I think that's causing a lot of difficulties. Because as you say, it's an unevenness, and there are older people, and this is an unusual thing, but older people in this case perhaps are those who are outside the mainstream of the main thrust of the globalization push right now, and perhaps are unwilling to accept it, while younger people just shrug it off, and it's part of their everyday culture now. And I don't know if this is the same kind of conversation that could have been had in the 1960s, as my parents might have been looking at people with long hair and hippies and things. I don't know if it happened back in the 30s when people looked at jazz musicians and the Roaring 20 refugees kind of thing. You can probably trace this throughout history, but I sense that this is different now because it's really crossing national borders. It's really very different.
Yeah, it's global. So yes, it's the 20th anniversary of Sergeant Pepper, but so it has something to do with the 60s.
Well,
but it's interesting that 10 years ago, which would have been the 40th anniversary of Sergeant Pepper, somebody wrote a book called Informalization, because I'm afraid I can't remember the name of the author offhand. He had understood that gradually the formalities on which public life had been based for as long as anybody could remember, and probably had always been based, were gradually disappearing. And that process, of course, has been accelerating over the last 10 years.
Well, I think it does not do well for the rule of law. I think it does not do well for institutions. And I think it also bodes poorly for any sort of concerted effort by government to try to make things work.
Yes, I think the rule of law, which is such an important principle, is becoming more and more difficult to maintain. I don't know whether you notice in driving that people don't stop for red lights anymore.
I do notice that.
I've even seen a bus drive through a red light. And just the road behavior is very
it's dangerous.
unpredictable.
It's dangerous.
Yeah.
It's dangerous.
Yeah. I mean, it all started with cyclists who didn't observe the rules of the road, and now cars don't either. I don't know I don't know how the insurance business is coping with this, but
very simply, we're putting little devices in people's cars. So if they blow through a stop sign or a red light and have an accident, we can blame them.
Anyway, I think that it's everything. All forms of regulation are becoming more difficult, and which means that everything is gradually becoming a process of more and more conscious negotiation.
Well, that's optimistic. I would say chaos. No.
Well, I'm an optimist. That's a congenital optimist. I have to agree, but because I think that more and more collective learning will make us capable of solving all the big problems which are predicted. But that's that comes from the optimism.
Well, let's see how the G20 gets on with solving the problems today and tomorrow in Hamburg. Maybe next week when we talk, we can look at the report card.
I think that their interaction with each other is very different from similar meetings 50 years ago.
Oh, I would say that. I think, well, even longer than that, Clemenceau and Lloyd George, I think, would be relatively out of place at these meetings. So, okay. All right, Professor. Okay. Thank you very much. We'll look forward to next week.
Yes.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.